Hello everybody, and I swear I have more than just this top. Now on our last video we went over how I painted my Boba Fett helmet. I have since edited this a little bit, I changed the visor position and made it a little bit longer. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about how I made the armour. So, I'll stop beating around the bush and go straight into it right now.
So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make a template. What I'm using as a base is I'm using a plastic mannequin. You can always use your own self, with somebody helping you put the tape on, or you can make your own duct tape mannequin. I put a tutorial in the description. What I'm doing here is I'm wrapping it with cling film and then putting tape on it. I actually put tape on the edges so then the cling film doesn't actually keep moving along when I'm trying to draw on it. The reason I'm using parcel tape here is because it's what I have at hand. You can use masking tape, duct tape, hell you can even use just normal old clear tape. And I drew a middle point right there because then I only have to draw one side of the template and then flip it so then it's symmetrical on both sides. The first thing I'm doing here is doing the collar piece because that's the uppermost part of the armour. I do have a reference photo up on my laptop while I'm doing this, which, you know, is of course common sense, because then you know that it's completely accurate to the thing you're wanting to make. Now I actually did screw up a bit here, so what I did was I got a kitchen paper and put some white spirit on it, and that actually got rid of the Sharpie line very well. Only thing is you will have to wait about 5 or 10 minutes for it to completely dry. But instead I just decided to do the other side of the chest plate, which doesn't cover all, just the chest. It covers the side as well. I'll just call it a chest-like plate. A chest-like plate is what I shall call it. This is a very, very important step in foam building, so take your time with this, don't rush it at all. And here we are, I'm almost finished. I just have to do this line and then I am finished making the base template. So now I'm cutting it out. I just put a craft knife down the centre point so then it comes off very nicely. This is why you're going to want to use cling film because then it will just come off really, really well. And then I just use some scissors just to cut it out. Since that right there, the collar piece actually does have a middle point, I put an arrow to where the middle point is, to where I want to flip it later. Now most of these patterns are pretty straightforward, but the chest is actually slightly curved. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to see where the actual curve is and then just cut a dart down that. This is so then when you transfer it to foam it will keep the original shape. And now I'll transfer them to paper. This is a little bit tricky to do because you can't really tape it onto paper because then it will tear the paper. So what I like to do is I either put a heavy surface on it or just spread my hand as evenly as I can, just so then all the edges are nice and flat on the paper. Of course, when you make these tape templates, these tape plates, they are really just a guideline. They're just so you can get like a good idea of what the shape is. Now for the chest armour, it is a little bit bigger, so I actually taped 2 pieces of paper together, and I just put a piece of the parcel tape on both sides. And as you see there, I'm putting some heavy-ish objects onto the tape plate, so then it keeps it nice and flat and doesn't move about when I'm trying to draw around it. And there we are, now time to cut them out. And there we are, there are all the paper templates done. And now to transfer them to the EVA foam which we're going to use. The foam which I have here is CF65 5mm foam, which I feel is a very good middle point where it's nice and durable, but it's not too thick. Because if it looks too thick, then it's going to look really bulky and a little bit daft. I'm just using a Sharpie here, just to trace around the template so then it will show up on the foam. You don't have to use a brown marker. I would use black, but my black ones have all run out. Don't try not to use a light coloured one, because then it just won't show up in the foam properly. And as you see there, I actually used the middle point and literally just flipped it while meeting up to the middle point, so then it's nice and even. Just like I'm doing there with the middle chest part. And now cut them out. What I use to cut them out is I use the craft knife. The reason you're going to use a craft knife instead of scissors is because the craft knife just has a better, straighter edge, which you don't have to sand out. Now the stomach piece here is a little bit short, and it just didn't look right while I placed it on my stomach. And as I'll demonstrate here by putting the chest pieces together, you will see that the stomach piece is actually a little bit short, and there is actually a lot of wiggle room which I can use to extend the stomach piece. And I'm going to show you how I extended it now. I got some of the foam which I'm using to make the armour out of, lined up the chest and put the actual original paper template on, and then I just traced around the outer edge, not on the centre point, because we're not going to actually meet them up in the middle. Then I flipped it up on the other side, and as you can see there is actually a decent amount of space which I can use. So I just joined those two areas up. There, all sorted. Now to cut that out with a craft knife. There we are. And there is all the EVA foam parts all cut out. Now before I do anything else to this, the right it is blessed. The right breastplate actually does have a couple of lines on it. I don't know what they're for, but it has it on there. So what I've done is I used a measuring tape just to make sure it's nice and straight and evenly spaced. And then I use the craft knife just to cut it out, because if you use scissors, then you're going to have to actually cut inside the template, and then it's just going to not sit as flat as it would if it was cut out with a craft knife. Now I'm going to heat up the foam, mainly so then the glue actually sticks to it a lot better and it's less porous. The glue I'm using is contact cement. You're going to want to have a nice thin layer on each edge, and then wait about 5 minutes for it to set, and then just press the edges together. Make sure you make it very, very nice and even. You don't want a big ugly seam on here, because if you do, it's going to be a lot of cleanup later. And there we go, there's both of the chest pieces glued down by the dart area. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to seal it with some wood filler caulking. I place it on there and I scrape away the excess caulking, but making sure that the seam is actually covered, and I use some water just to smooth it out. I use 2 layers for this. While you're waiting for that to set, you're going to want to actually shape the other parts. For the stomach area, I heated up both sides and actually placed it inside a mug while it was rolled up. This is so then it actually makes sure that you have a very, very good curved shape. With the collar piece, I literally rolled it up inside itself. This is so then that also gets a nice curved piece. I find that EVA foam is a little bit of a nightmare to actually form with some heat, so I always like to over curve it. What I'm doing here is I'm just putting a bit of 2mm craft foam on the inside where the little lines are. This is just so then it keeps its shape a lot better and it doesn't keep moving about. And now I'm going to add some little dents, like it's been hit with something very, very heavy. What I do is I heat it up with a heat gun and then I press this plastic Easter egg so then it has a nice rounded curve to it. And then once I've done that, I actually press my thumb in just to make it all nice and even. And now on to the ceiling. What I like to do is I put one layer of Mod Podge on, just like with my Boba Fett helmet, and then 4 to 5 layers of Plasti Dip. I'm using the same colour Plasti Dip I did with my Boba Fett helmet, which was a military khaki green. And now onto the shoulder template while we're waiting for that to set. Just like with the others, put some cling film on, then tape it, and then cut it out. Now, since the shoulders are actually a lot more curved than the chest and everything else, you're actually going to want to cut out multiple darts for this. So what I do is I like to draw a line on where I want to cut it onto the tape, and then put these little marks on it. These are indication marks. The reason you're going to want to use these is because then it actually can be lined up when you glue it back together. So then you're just going to want to cut down those lines. Now if you've done it correctly, it will be nice and flat. Now just transfer that to the paper, adding the indication marks on there as well. Then transfer that to foam. I cut out both of these here. And now before you're going to want to glue them together, you're actually going to want to form these a little bit. This is just so then there's no friction or force that the glue has to contend with. And what I like to do is I like to actually press it on my knee, making sure that the darted areas line up. You don't have to do this, but this is always a really, really good idea because then it's just less stress for you later. Then I go on with contact cement just like I did with the chest darts. Then with the indication marks, line it up very, very nicely, making sure that it's a nice flat seam. Now I know that Boba Fett's shoulders are a little bit smaller than this, but I always thought that Boba Fett's shoulders were too small and not very practical, so that's why I made mine a bit bigger. And then you're going to want to cover these with the same caulking you used for the chest darts. I also used about 2 layers for that. And then cover it in Mod Podge and 4 or 5 layers of Plasti Dip. Now the last torso piece you're going to want to make is the cod piece. And the cod piece is a little bit weird because it actually doesn't sit right underneath the stomach. In fact, there's a belt in between it. So I found this a little bit more tricky, as you'll see here. I put tape on the mannequin so then I knew how long it was going to be. And then I drew down the middle point a nice long line so then I know where to actually draw the cod piece from. And here I tried to actually fold it in half so then I knew where so then I could actually make it symmetrical. Technically this is actually a freehand template, which is a lot more trickier than the process which we used earlier. It can be done, but it will take a lot more time and effort to do. Now when I actually transferred it to foam, I noticed that it was a little bit too short, so then I actually extended it, kind of the same way I did with the stomach piece. Now for the knees, I actually used my own knees to make sure it actually fits properly. And this is pretty much the exact same way you would want to do the shoulders. I had a photo up of the knee armour on my phone, so then it actually, you know, I actually know what shape they are and what they actually look like. And just cut it out as normal. But what I actually did was, since it had like a really large curve, I actually cut it in half. And what I'm doing here is I'm folding the sides. This is just so then I know when to transfer it to the foam, which I'm going to do here. I cut it off of the paper template and then draw onto the foam the area. The reason I'm going to want to do this is I'm going to want to create a trench inside the foam and then put some hot glue inside it. And then I'm going to actually create a really harsh edge onto it. The reason for this is, it's because that's what the knees actually kind of look like. And I just find it a lot easier just to do it like this. And before I glue them together, I'm going to shape them just like I did with the shoulders. And since this is actually for the knee, using my knee was definitely the best way to shape them. And then glue it with the contact cement just like I did before. And join them together. I didn't use registration marks for this because since it's one long line, it was quite easy to actually line up and get it pretty spot on. Now, he does actually have two little barrels on the side of both pieces. So what I did was I cut two shapes out of 10mm foam. And then to glue them both together, I use heavy duty spray glue. The reason I'm using spray glue for this is because one, it saves on contact cement, and two, it's just a lot easier to spread on a large surface than with contact cement. You're definitely going to want to spray it somewhere which you don't mind being sticky or somewhere that's easy to clean up. For me, I used the bottom of the table. And just press them together. You don't have to wait a few minutes for it to actually set, just like with contact cement, because since it's spray glue, it makes it really nice and even, and this is usually for gluing carpet to your flooring. So it's a little bit different to contact cement, but not too dissimilar to it. And there I am lining them up just to make sure that they're even to the template, and I am just tidying up the edges with a Dremel tool. Now for the actual barrels, what I've done is I actually used the metal tip of a silicone sculpting piece and drilled a hole with the Dremel tool roughly around the same size as the actual thing which I'm going to use. You're definitely going to want to wear a dust mask for doing this. And then what I did was I just filled it up with hot glue and then just pressed it in. For the other cylinder, it is a little bit bigger, so what I used was just a cap for a pen, and then just rolled it up in a little bit of with a little bit of contact cement and 2mm craft foam. And there we go. There's both of the barrels. You're going to want to do this for the other one as well, but flip it of course. And there is both of the knee pieces. And here is the shoulder pieces all sealed with plastic. I used grey for this because since I'm going to be actually painting it with yellow, I decided not to actually use the green. What I'm using here is I'm using cadmium yellow deep for the shoulder pieces. And there's my omnipotent power skipping forward in time to show you it's completely painted. I used about 6 to 7 layers for this because since the grey plastic is actually a lot darker than yellow, I had to use quite a few layers for this. Now on one of Boba Fett's shoulders he actually has the logo of Mandalore. So what I did was I just traced it off a laptop and made sure it was the right size. Now since it actually does have a white background to the red skull, I cut out the background first, then placed it quite carefully onto the shoulder piece, and then with a biro pen, I tried to make sure that I didn't actually put any of the ink onto the shoulder because then that would actually show up. I just wanted to make sure it was scored just lightly enough so I was able to see it, but not so hard that it was visible on the actual shoulder. Then after about 3 layers of white paint it is done. But before the last layer dries, I'm going to actually put the skull template onto the white. You're going to want to make it kind of dry but not completely dry. This is so then the actual paper kind of sticks to the paint. But of course you don't want to do it straight after you've actually painted the layer because then it will, you know, the paper will absorb it and then it will just look a mess. I'd say give it about 5-10 minutes before you try this. And then with this I actually use a red biro because of course the Skull of Mandalore is red. And then the paint actually did come off a little bit, but since this is supposed to be weathered, it actually was a very happy accident. There we are. I couldn't show it to the camera because I don't know why, maybe I'm just stupid. And there we go. Since red is actually a bit darker than white, it only took me 2 layers. And then for the little logo on the chest, I did the exact same method. The knees I painted the exact same, except for the barrels I actually dry brushed some silver paint onto them. And since the barrels are actually made out of plastic, this is very convincing to it to actually be metal. And now on to the last step, which is to be weathering it. I found in reference photos that, just like my Boba Fett's helmet, he had some chipped paint, but unlike the Boba Fett helmet, it was kind of yellow underneath. So I mixed up some yellow modelling paint, and at first I used a little bit of brown, but I found it still was quite light, so I actually added a tiny bit of silver just to knock the yellow down and make it look a bit more duller. Paint, I very lightly brushed it onto the armour. You're not going to want to have a really thick layer because then it won't look very convincing. And then I use the silver paint from the exact same set and then very carefully brush it on to where the chip paint is. But don't completely cover it, because then if you do, then you're not going to have the yellow paint underneath. So then all that effort you did with the yellow paint is pretty much gone to waste. I feel painting it in the centre is the best bet. Now for the shoulders you're going to want to weather them a little bit differently. What I used was I got some brown paint and dry brushed it on. If you don't know what dry brushing is, then you can see my last video where I explain how I do it. And now on to gluing it to your shirt. I know I look a lot like a middle-aged father here, But I'm wearing the boiler suit, which I'm using for the undersuit for Boba, and the actual vest, which I'm going to be making, which is what the armour's glued onto. Now I am wearing 3 layers of clothing here because I'm using hot glue to glue it on. And you know, hot glue is, well, it's hot. So if you're not careful, you can burn yourself, which is why I'm wearing 3 layers. The tip which I do with this is I actually put hot glue around the edge of the foam armour and then a little bit in the centre. The reason you're going to want to have the edge is so then it doesn't buckle up when you're moving around. I'm actually looking in a mirror while I'm doing this so then I can actually see if it's lined up properly. You can have someone to help you do this, but you can do it yourself, but it would be a lot easier if somebody did it for you. What I'm doing there is I'm just lining it up before I glue it on, because of course once you glued it on it's very, very tough to get off. So be very, very careful and take your time while you're doing this last step. You see there, a bit of the collar piece did come off because it wasn't glued down securely. Just put my thumb up there just to let you know that I'm fine. Now for the knee armour, I decided to actually glue it straight onto the boiler suit as well. And this is a little bit different. I literally just glued the sides on because since it's the knees, if I glued the whole knee on, it would probably be a bit more difficult to actually walk. Now for the last piece, which is the stomach piece. You're going to want to press it down for a couple of minutes just so then the hot glue cools down. And there we are, I'm doing a little dance because I'm happy that it's all finished. Now putting it on the helmet just to see if it fits.
And there we go. It is all done and dusted, and what I'm going to do next with this is I'm actually going to cut the sleeves off, and I might actually cut this little bit off as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. Join me next time where I'll be going over how I made the gauntlets. And I hope you enjoyed this video, but if you didn't, I'm very, very sorry.